All right, recording is back. We are back from the cross-project eventlet session. Eric has the chair as he is doing the investigation on the multiple backends and how to remove eventlet from their usage. So Eric, I'll let you have the floor.
Sure. Did everybody make it back in here? I don't know.
Maybe we're missing a couple. Maybe there's Erlang.
So yeah, I've been digging into this for a while. I've been mostly focusing on Cinder volume, with the thought that it's kind of the harder one to pull eventlet out of. I've got a bunch of code up on Garrett, which definitely needs some cleaning up, but it runs if you were using single backend for Cinder. I've tested it mostly with the RBD driver, but there's a few things going on there. So as we mentioned in the broader eventlet session, multi-backend does not work yet for Cinder volume. The reason for that is because multi-backend Cinder volume spawns multiple Oslo services, one for each backend. And the way that is implemented currently, it ends up sharing SQL alchemy state between each service, which worked in the eventlet case, but does not work at all in the threads case. So the Oslo folks have some work in progress, and they're going to introduce a change in Oslo service that will let us run in a model that should not have that problem that they're tracking under their fork versus multiprocessing work. The hope is that
references to that work, or anything I can use as an anchor.
Oh, there's downstream JIRAs for it. I think the code is not submitted upstream yet, so I don't know what to refer to. The theory is that once they do that work in Oslo service, then we can make some changes to Cinder volume, which will presumably be pretty small changes, and then it should work in multi-backend mode is the hope. I'll link to, let's see. That's the patches as is. There's a bunch of stuff going on in there that I'm going to keep refining over time. One of which I was trying to decide how to switch on and off eventlet versus threaded mode. So I coded up something in there which is very messy looking, but it seems to work, where you can turn it on and off with a config option. The problem, of course, is eventlet has to monkey patch things very early in the process. And so the normal code that we have currently that reads the config file to gather all the options runs far too late for you to make that kind of decision at that point. So I coded up a thing which is an absolute nightmare of jumbling around imports and stuff. But what it does is it, at the very beginning of the Cinder volume startup process, reads the Cinder config file to find the option to say, do you want eventlet or not? And gets that Boolean out of the config file and then throws away that whole config object. And then goes along and imports the eventlet code or not. And then we go into the regular Cinder volume startup process where it will read the config file, again, the normal way. It's kind of complicated to follow in the file because you have to run a bunch of code before you do half of our imports, but it seems to work. By the time we get toward merging all of this stuff, I don't really know what the requirement is going to be for that. Like, I think Nova did it with an environment variable instead of a config option. If the claim is really that at the end of the G cycle, we need to not use Eventlet, then by then, maybe we don't need an option for it at all. I don't know. We'll see as we get there. But I was trying to just have a way to turn it on and off so we can play with it in gate jobs and that kind of stuff. Other pieces in that stack of patches, I was fiddling with our fake volume driver because I wanted to have a way to do some testing of concurrent operations. And so I made a new slow fake volume driver that just does a bunch of sleeps in different operations so we can kind of ensure that things are running concurrently and that the interface basically works. I've got one patch in there that adds some debug logging to the manager just to give some info on threads. We'll kind of see what we want for that as we go forward. And I think I put a patch on the end there that turns this on in Cinder scheduler, which in theory is a lot simpler than the volume service. So I don't know, any questions so far on all that?
I just had one. I have a couple of thoughts, but one about a conversation we were having just as you joined with regard to the shim that Nova and the Nova is using and Glance proposed would be backporting. It would make changes to master by using a shim a little bit easier to backport because we could backport the patch without backporting the shim implementation. Presumably, if we're careful. Does that make sense, Rajat?
For backporting, what exactly?
So we were talking about like, so in the session before, Dan proposed they proposed basically using all of the calls to Eventlet specific things be functions to a very thin shim that they could just flip on and off. And then he went further to propose two different packages, one where the Eventlet removal is switched on and one where it's off. So you could have two different packages and be absolutely certain that Eventlet was off because there's no reference to it at all in the code that composes the package. So
yeah, I was trying to follow that discussion. I didn't quite understand why that's a requirement or why they want to do that exactly.
We couldn't either. We were speculating about what the benefits would be.
It seemed to be a very long discussion about I want to be able to set up some CI jobs and make sure that I know that they're doing the right thing and not testing the wrong configuration, which is, I mean, that's useful, but I don't think that we're really at the stage where that's what we care about right now. I mean, I think it's, I think we want to focus a lot more on the actual implementation of it.
Yeah, Dan's idea. So basically, I think Glance at this point is ready. So they are experimenting more with it. So they just wanted a way if the code goes to production and someone faces issues with the new model without Eventlet, there it could provide a way to switch between the old model to just see like if this new issue is introduced by the non-Eventlet model, like at least a way to check those things or avoid breaking in customer environments.
Yeah, and I mean, Nova did some stuff like poisoning the Eventlet namespace so that you can't accidentally use Eventlet, and I mean, we can do all that kind of stuff later. I'm much more interested in having it up and running before worrying too much about sealing all the windows kind of stuff.
Yeah, the main idea was like implementing it in a way that the calls to eventlet and non-eventlet things are separated in a in a separate place, like in a confined space where so like the eventlet.sleep and time.sleep calls are done based on a decision if this is a eventlet or non-eventlet environment like that.
Well, and that's relevant for stuff like the startup code I was talking about. Half of the eventlet calls that are in Cinder currently should not say eventlet in them because they never had to. And we had a whole bunch of like eventlet.sleep calls that should have just said time.sleep, and we just did it wrong because the whole point of eventlet monkey patching code is that all the code using it doesn't have to explicitly know about eventlet. So I think it's a good idea, but I think it's only applicable in a few places. So I know we still got some issues around unit tests to sort out. Those are very complex. I ran into some weird things over the last couple of weeks there that I'm working on. I know John has as well. One of the to-dos that I have, are we going to at some point revive the rally job? Because it would be useful for testing eventlet. It does not work at all. It's run on every patch and it has not succeeded in like 2 years. So I am kind of the opinion that it would be great if someone wanted to fix that. I might get to it eventually. I looked at it briefly and I don't know what's wrong with it, but it doesn't work at all.
Is anyone with tons of extra time on their hands, would they like to volunteer to revise their knowledge?
Yeah, because this is one of the situations where it would actually be a useful thing to be able to run.
Maybe we can, I don't like to reference downstream stuff too much, but if that's part of the eventlet effort, maybe we can create a, whatever the word is in that thing to just make that part of the effort. We can get that assigned. And
yeah,
maybe, I could even make it part of something I work on.
There's a few other tendrils that we haven't figured out either, like task flow, which we use heavily, has eventlet references inside of it. Not many, but it has a little bit. And somebody needs to go untangle that and figure out what to do with it, which may be me eventually, maybe somebody else. I don't know.
Is our use of task flow unique, or is that a snowflake, or have others crossed that bridge too?
I think Cinder uses it more than about any other project actually does. It's pretty woven into our volume create process. I'm not sure. It looks like Manila does not use it at all. They must have fudged that when they forked off a Cinder somehow. But we will have to understand. I don't really know if that's an easy or hard thing to fix. And then we've got, let's see, when I'm just looking at my stack of patches, I've got 1 or 2 changes of things I had to tweak here and there.
So I had 2 questions regarding. So one is regarding the vendor drivers. If they use eventlet explicitly somewhere, like is it going to be their work item, or like Cinder team will handle it?
Well, if they're just calling eventlet.sleep, we should just change it and merge it. I think 1 or 2 drivers might be doing more complicated things, but I hope it's rare. I think it's a rare thing.
Yeah, if you encounter cases like RBD where we are doing like this tpool.proxy thing, like to call lower level libraries.
RBD is interesting because the eventlet code in the RBD driver, a lot of it is to run things in native threads already. And so we'll need to translate how that's done, but we understand that code pretty well. And I think it's not like, you know, the whole point of the tpool stuff is to run stuff in a native thread because you need to in that driver. So
yeah, migration from thread pool to native Python is well documented. That should be pretty straightforward.
yeah, Nova did a lot of work building like nicely formed utility methods around things like that I think we probably want to copy a little bit of where it makes sense. It may be that Oslo has enough in it that we don't really need a whole lot on our own. I'm not sure, but conceptually RBD should be simple anyway, since it's relying heavily on native threads already. Looking at the drivers, if I just grep for eventlet, I mean, I see a bunch of sleep calls, which those are trivial to change. I see a couple of eventlet.spawn, which we'll need to change to spawn whatever kind of thread, you know, they want there, but there's not much that's doing that kind of thing.
Okay. And another question was regarding, so we are in very early stages of like getting this implemented, but is there a plan of like performance testing as well, like comparing the two models and see?
We need to do that. It's we don't really have a lot of a plan of how we're going to do it yet. I mean,
how much of that would a functioning rally job cover?
it'll cover some of it. You know, most of the rally things are pretty quick CRUD operations that don't do a whole lot. But, you know, we've got some other concurrency tests in Cinder Tempest plugin that do like 5 or 10 simultaneous create volume from images. And we'll want to really hammer on stuff like that with like large numbers of threads to make sure things work right and make sure that Cinder behaves correctly when you bump up against boundaries of how many threads are in the thread pool and, you know, that kind of thing. I think really understanding how we're going to make sure we test all that stuff is a problem we got to spend some time thinking about, because I don't really have a lot of answers there yet. But all the services presumably are going to be wanting to do things like that. We can get there as far as stability testing. We can get pretty far with the Tempest stuff, but as you all know, we've never really had a lot of great infrastructure for actual performance testing with Cinder. So getting something set up where we can really study A/B comparisons will be interesting for sure.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
I think the assumption is if we implement this correctly, it should perform just as well, if not maybe better than the eventlet system. So if we, you know, if we see huge performance impacts from this, then we've probably messed up somewhere. But we certainly need to try to test for it.
Yeah, so just a stupid question, like, so in Eventlet we have this cooperative multi-threading, but I think the native threads are interrupt driven and controlled by the OS scheduler. So we won't be needing those explicit yields anymore. Is that correct assumption, or?
Right. So I mean, the whole eventlet model, for those not too familiar with it, is that it uses green threading, and the premise of it is that when you import eventlet, it patches all the different Python IO calls that you might do to read and write from files or interact with the system in various ways. And so when you call, read on a file, it'll skip over to some other thread and do some other work. So all that goes away in this threading model, where we're just running regular Python code in multiple threads that are scheduled by the OS.
Okay, at least we will have less cases where the service is hung.
Yeah, that's the hope. The idea is that anywhere that we have to worry about locks for concurrency and that kind of stuff should be basically the same as it is today, because we already are basically running a multi-threaded model under Eventlet. It's just implemented in a different way than it will be in the threads version. So it's certainly possible that we could find new concurrency bugs, but a lot of them probably exist already if we run into them.
So all the projects are going to implement this thread model, right? Like there is.
I think most of them are. I'm not sure if. I think it's a little bit different, maybe for things like Glance, where the Glance processes are spun up by ModWSGI, and it's kind of managed there, and not from the Glance like command line program like the Cinder one is for Cinder volume. But yeah, I haven't heard too many other approaches. I'm going to go look into. Swift had a session this morning. I'm going to go look into their notes from that and see what they're doing. But I think they're maybe doing some more complex things with async IO and such over in the Swift world. But I think most of us are going with the threads approach.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
I also haven't really gotten far into, so I've been working mostly on Cinder volume. I haven't looked at Cinder backup much yet. That's on the to-do list. Should be similar to Cinder volume with how it works, but it should be, we don't have to worry about multi-backend, and it should be a little easier as far as that part. Cinder scheduler, I have a patch up to turn it on. I mean, the scheduler doesn't do a whole lot with multi-threading, so I'm assuming that will be pretty straightforward as we test there. I have not spent much time on the API yet. I know, John, you looked at that a little bit. I don't know, kind of, I guess we haven't done a whole lot of work on it yet, though, on the API service.
No, I have a patch up that replaces all the sleep calls. And while you think that would be, I thought it would be trivial, it explodes in the gate in a very interesting and non-deterministic ways, which is frustrating. I need to allocate some time and dig into that.
Isn't our API same as Glance using ModWSGI or maybe UWSGI?
It's similar.
So either, for the Glance thing, like either they spawn it via eventlet dot create a server via Eventlet or via ModWSGI. So that's the two ways they support.
Right. I mean, I think the standard configuration for Glance now is that it's ModWSGI, and ModWSGI is just in charge of starting up the threads, and I think is the mainstream way to deploy it.
Yeah,
Cinder API in theory should be even easier than the Glance one because all it talks to is the database and Rabbit. It doesn't interact with data like the Glance API does. So that's why I was leaving the Cinder API to last, because it and the scheduler should be both pretty easy compared to Cinder volume and maybe Cinder backup. But yeah, as John found out, the unit test stuff is a mess.
Yeah, even just the non-sleep zeros, like the sleep with values larger than 0, should just be a search and replace. And it largely is, and everything almost runs just fine until the interpreter runs out of memory and the system kills the Python process. And it's never the same test. It never fails in exactly the same way, but it consistently fails. There's something is wrong. I need to do some profiling, sort out where the leak is and what's going on.
Yeah, that's probably an area I should look at soon, is where I didn't want to go too much further with the Cinder volume stuff until we can get the new Oslo changes, which is probably going to take, I assume, a couple weeks before we can get them and run them. Maybe I should start looking at the unit test stuff some.
So I assume at some point they're going to remove Eventlet from DevStack, and this is going to be we're going to have to selectively opt into. I don't know how is that going to work. Like, is there a day when we just start failing all of our gate jobs?
I don't know, but it's going to be a bit, because Manila is even further behind us. So, like, all the services are going to have to kind of work before they can do it. I don't know what the plan is for that. I mean, presumably there will be a target to not install Eventlet at all in there, but you can't actually spin it up yet, because there's also dependencies, like in, I think some of the clients import Eventlet as well. At least the Glance one does. I forget if any of the other ones do. So it's almost impossible to actually like run a deployment without Eventlet installed currently.
Okay. So we don't really have to be the first across the finish line. We just have to beat Manila.
Well, in Manila, presumably is going to be relying on our Cinder volume work for the Manila share service, since it's a similar architecture. I don't know. They have a PTG session on Thursday, I think. I'm going to make sure I sit in there and see what they're up to.
Do you have a link to that? Like I can either put a line link or something I can put in our notes. That might be interesting. I'm curious.
For the Manila. It's Thursday at 15:30 UTC. Whoa. So Manila is going to, presumably the changes in Cinder Manila are going to look very similar between the API and scheduler and share service.
Is there any chance we get a small background on this? Why we're removing the eventlets? Just out of curiosity.
Well, Eventlet is being removed basically because the thought is that the Eventlet project itself is not terribly healthy and doesn't have a lot of people maintaining it. And so it's a huge risk to OpenStack stability because all the OpenStack services rely on it. And that we've already scraped into some issues with newer versions of Python as they come out, where it's been tricky to get Eventlet to work on the current versions of Python. So I guess the TC decided a cycle or two ago that we really just should get rid of it rather than trying to maintain it and keep it running ourselves.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a pretty significantly large third-party library, and it's a lot of what it's implemented is now present in native Python, and so at some point the developers, if it hasn't happened already, are going to lose interest in maintaining it, and we're going to be relying on an unmaintained library for a critical part of our functionality. And so yeah, eventually it's going to be a problem.
And we have had cases in the past where we moved from SQL Alchemy to Alembic, where again, same reason, that it was not being maintained actively.
SQL Alchemy migrate, yeah.
Yeah, SQL Alchemy migrate, sorry.
Gotcha. Thanks.
I will post the removal.eventlet.org guide in the Etherpad that helps highlight some of these things as well. All right, we've got 25 minutes. Cardoe is supposed to come and talk about some things that he brought up in a very lengthy IRC message to me a while back, and I, at the time, did not have time to make sense of all of it. So I thought a PTG session would be probably the best to go through all of it because it was quite detailed.
Yeah, well, on the Eventlet stuff before we leave it, I don't really know. I kind of want to ask if anybody's interested in it to look at some of the code and see what you think. I don't know if it's really mature enough to say, like, review it because it's kind of all still in progress. But if you're interested in it, maybe at least be aware of what's going on there. And I've got some to-dos tagged in there for code that still needs some work around places we use TPool from Eventlet. And I don't know, I'm going to keep cranking along on this stuff.
Do we have an ETA for the Oslo stuff? Like, it'd be interesting to know like how we can plan around and like try to create something like a schedule for this.
I think there's an engineer that's working on it right now, but I don't know what the timeline looks like. I'm also not sure how that's going to shake out as far as us consuming it, because presumably they have to code it and merge it and then actually do a release for us to have any way to consume it, even for development purposes. Maybe we can find a way to do it before it's actually released, but I'm not sure what that's going to look like exactly. I don't know how to set up like, you know, a patch under review to pull in Oslo code that isn't actually in a release yet. You're muted, John.
We can
You
set up a gate job that does that. If we install Oslo whatever as a sibling, it'll just grab for master and use it.
Oh, kind of like the libs from Git thing.
Sort of, yeah. It's we must do it somewhere with OS Brick. I'll have to look. But yeah, we could do that. But I mean, the problem is well, I guess if you do it, there's probably a way to do it locally too. But we can set up a gate thing.
I think it's called override checkout master. If we do that, then
You might be able to get far enough just with the depends on stuff in Garrett. I'm not sure.
no, I don't think depends on works well for libraries. I have had patches where I do this override checkout thing. So at least for Glance Store, I have used it. Maybe for OS Brick. In the local environment, like all these are stored in this virtual environment inside the OPT stack .env and then the library. So I just create a symlink, soft link for like I git clone the package and then create a symlink on that directory. So I'm able to use OS Brick or Glance Store directly in their stack with that.
Do you have a doc reference for that, or like a example, something I can reference, because I know I'm going to want to come back and look for that.
I can create one, but I've been just doing it like for a long time, so I never created something. But I can write something up.
I thought the override checkout was to specify the branch. We'll have to check.
Yeah, if we specify the master branch there, then it doesn't take from the released version. And then I think that depends on might work. I think that was the way, but I need to check again.
Okay.
That's what I can.
Because I know if you install as siblings, because I just ran into an issue with this that was blocking the landscape. What Zool will do is it removes the package from upper constraints, so that when it builds the package for the sibling, it'll break upper constraints because it's a dev version past the last release. So some combination of those should work. The override checkout master. Yeah, because you'll still have the upper constraint problem. I don't know. We will, between me and Rajat, we'll get this figured out.
How are we with Eventlet? We got 20 minutes. Do we want to try to shove a smaller topic in this block? If so, which one?
So not necessarily we need to add this right now. Actually, I think I'll need some time to investigate a few things before we bring this. But we wanted to bring the RBD block geometry discussion we mentioned in last week's meeting, that we wanted to make that global for all drivers. So you might want to show that somewhere in the agenda for this week. I got late today, so I couldn't add that one.
Erlan, are you ready to talk about that? I wonder how long do you
Yeah,
think
that
that's
should be
gonna take?
fairly quick.
We've got
Basically,
15 minutes. Do you want to try to do it?
yeah, I think we can do that.
Let's do
So
it.
basically what we have today is the block geometry, the way it's proposed in this RBG patch is that we have like some boilerplate values, and then we would break down these values into these two block geometry values that we send to libvirt, and libvirt knows what to do with that. The only driver that currently does something similar, which is the SolidFire driver. So we wanted to have a way to share the code between that without breaking compatibility and stuff like that. And I think that was somewhat a common ground, at least in the meeting that we had, that we want to have one option for that can be used for other drivers as well, right? I think that the only point that we might want to discuss here is whether we should use the previous format, or we should use like the new one, which is like those boilerplates that they expand into these like two parameters, two parameter values. The way that I was thinking about doing that, this is most technical details, or to have these options or functions to deal with that, like define it way up in the driver classes. But the thing is, the base driver, the base class that's shared across the SolidFire and RBD, it's only the base VD, right? I don't know how people would feel about adding functions like functional functions to the base VD. It's been a while since I spent time looking at that. But if I remember correctly, that class was mostly for kind of boilerplate functionality, not usually actual code. So those were my two things I think that people might want to discuss there. So if we want to go with the idea of using these parameters the way that we're defining in the code today, and where exactly we will be the better place to put in a place that was shared and didn't break the architecture that you currently have.
I need to go and look at the base volume driver more closely to be able to speak on that. But it does sound like we have an agreement that this kind of change should be made so that all drivers can make use of it, not just specific for the RBD driver, which means the patch as it is, it's going to need some sort of update before we can get this landed.
The RBD driver patch that's up currently does put it in the base driver, I think.
Yeah, we did Zach actually did quick prototype based on the discussions on Friday.
I hadn't seen that yet. Okay. That's
yeah, cool. So that's the difference from PetSat 7 to 8.
So this might be a stupid idea, but you know how like most of the drivers inherit from several different you know, so you got like the base driver, there's the clonable image volume driver, the manageable, can't even say it, manageable VD. There's a bunch of those. But it makes sense to put the geometry, to have like a geometry VD.
I would say probably not.
Okay.
Because I think we kind of regretted structuring those classes that way.
Okay.
You're done. And I think it's been kind of a to-do item for a bunch of years to go and clean up that whole interface. Just nobody's wanted to go spend time on it.
I thought we loved that. I remember many PTGs ago, like people being very psyched about that whole like a la carte thing. But
well, there was a concept there that it was going to help with all the ABC class stuff, identify which drivers can do which thing and which things they can't do, and that never actually panned out to like work. So the upsides that we wanted to get from it didn't ever really appear, and what we ended up with is just a very complicated interface of a bunch of classes that don't really like need to exist. Which is why my instinct is that adding another one is probably not what we actually want to do.
Makes sense. I wonder if we have any idea if that was ever documented anywhere. That predates all of my PTL experience. I have no idea if there was any like agreement or resolution on that.
How it ended up being shaped that way?
Or just like, did we actually agree to try to contract all of that stuff back down into a much smaller set of base classes? Or I'm just wondering what the, okay. Or was it just
no,
unspokenly agreed that it was a nightmare?
So it's even worse because we also have the interface definitions, which are independent of all these things. So we're still in the middle of the project of moving the documentation so that it all shows up in the interface class, so that all the functions are documented in one place. And once we've got that, then maybe it would make sense to go ahead and consolidate the classes. I don't know. The problem is you need to have some time to do it, and then you got to test the heck out of it.
Well, and we want to avoid breaking all your drive where possible, and it's.
I mean, it was sort of an interesting idea, right? For your driver, you just grab the parts that you need for the stuff that your driver can actually do. But like Eric said, it makes it kind of ugly, and then it's a pain to trace through to figure out what's coming from where.
Yeah. And then we never really implemented a lot of the stuff that would, in theory, enable us to do.
Right.
And we had discussions for years about being able to query for what driver operations you can actually perform. And then we never got agreement on doing any of that work. So, yeah.
I remember that. So, as it relates to this geometry patch, is the current patch as it is, which is changing the base volume driver class. Is that the best place for that we can reason about at this moment? Or
So this is going to be useful for basically any driver that attaches a block device to an instance, right? So for like, presumably, well, I don't know, even for NFS, I guess it still does the same thing, right? Because it configures the instance to attach it with
Yeah,
certain flags.
yeah. The only thing is that even if we add something to the base VD, like the initialize connection or get properties, the drivers, they will still have to get this value from the parent, right? And I think currently no drivers no do that.
I
Right?
think we have some other precedent, if I remember correctly, for options that can be tacked on from the manager, even if the driver doesn't necessarily do it. Like I want to say maybe discard works like that. I have to go look and see.
Yeah, but that should be specifically for the initialize connection function, right? So every driver will have a specific way of getting the information. Some drivers just create things on the flight.
Well, I guess one thing just to clarify, so this option doesn't actually do anything on the back end through the driver, right? This
No,
is,
it doesn't.
yeah, it's just what we send to Nova to say how to attach it, I think.
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, we do something similar for discard, I think, where when we're setting up the connection options, it can add it even if the driver doesn't do anything. What do you get by default with this now? Is everybody running with the 512 emulated, or are they just running with regular 512?
Yeah, we couldn't get to the bottom of it, but libvirt somehow finds the default and uses it. The default is not defined in Nova or Cinder or OpenStack, just libvirt.
So it's
default.
whatever it defaults to.
Yeah.
Because if we land this change and then it changes the disk geometry for people that have stuff up and running already, that will definitely be messy.
Yeah, the default would be not sending anything, right? Or setting each, leaving the way it is for.
which is what we get now. Like to change the default, the driver would have to pull this from the base class and send it along.
Yeah.
For those that want to do that, which it sounds like it looks like that's what we are having now in the current proposed change.
Well, yeah, I think what we really want is for this to take effect for all drivers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it's currently taking effect for ICE SCSI. Huh.
I can see it's only called an RBD and SolidFire.
Yeah.
At least the parameters and connection information are stored in those two drivers. If you want to do it for all the drivers, we can do it in the volume manager. Right after the driver calls initialize connection, we have this enforce multipath which we add for all the drivers. Similarly, we can do something here.
Yeah.
We may not
Yeah,
want
that
to.
would be even easier because you wouldn't have to rely on the drivers having to go and change their codes, right?
Yeah, Rajat, that's right next to what I was talking about before. So the line right before the enforce multipath is the parse connection option stuff. And that handles the discard flag, which to me seems a lot like the same thing as this.
Okay, yeah.
The only thing that I think we would have to have code to handle specifically the solid fire case, right? Because it might be returning something we might want to consider that.
So do we have code on the Nova side that makes use of these connection information fields, the one we are adding?
I think it just bypasses to libvirt during the connection of the volume. It just passes the whole data that we send.
Yeah, but does libvirt translate? I mean, the Nova libvirt layer, does it translate this physical block size and logical block size into libvirt specific parameters and put it into the XML?
I don't know. I haven't checked.
Yeah, otherwise it will be a no thing.
So it looks like Nova reads fields logical block size and physical block size from the connection info data. So I think if we supply it shaped right, it looks like it does try to use it. For things like multipath D, I guess we assume that it's gonna just do the right thing, match how the block devices are set up, or does it require setting anything?
Yeah, I don't see anything related to provider geometry on Nova code. So
Yeah, I've pasted two references. The first one sets the libvirt parameters based on the
libvirt.
and the second one sets the
that's true.
yeah, so it's supported. That's what I wanted to know.
It's basically a bypass, right, of the option. Just get it the way it is and just pass if it's present. Yeah, okay. I'll pass along that information for Zach. He's the one that is working closely in the code itself. So do you guys think that the volume manager, and I also think that the volume manager would be like a better way to make this option like applicable to all drivers, independently of the drivers having to create an override on the method, and yeah, nobody would actually do that, right? Or just
Also,
a few.
Sure.
also to Eric's point, like so right now we are using whatever default libvirt has, and in your patch I can see 512e, which is the emulated 512.4096 we have. So that might change things. So it would be good to have default as nothing, like
Yeah.
unless the operator explicitly sets this, then only we will use it.
Mm-hmm. And for adding the options into the volume manager, it wouldn't change the sections where we would put in Cinder, the Cinder config file, or it would go to the global section, not the drivers. Or is it possible to reach it from there? Yeah, I think my question is how do we want this option to be displayed to the user, right? Because it might go inside the driver section, or it could go to the default section. Depending on.
It should definitely be. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure either, but I thought like it should be driver specific, since we could be configuring some block based backends.
And the other nodes, right? Yeah, true.
Yeah, it looks like it's in the right place to me in the proposed patch.
Yeah, so the proposed patch, the thing is on the proposed patch is it will only work for RBD and the solid fire, right? And other drivers can opt in, but they might need some changes on the code.
Oh yeah,
Well,
I just meant where the option is. I think we need to put code into.
got it.
Yeah, I think we need to put code into the initialized connection path, like we're talking about the parse connection options or near the enforce multipath stuff, for this to apply to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is maybe a bug in the current code where we're not doing this for the initialized connection snapshot for drivers that do that. I need to look at that at some point.
Was that to support one of the backup use cases, or is it like a?
I think I'm not too clear on it. I forget why we had it. I think EMC or somebody had a use case that they thought it was really useful for.
I can see in the backup manager we have a call to this initialized connection snapshot. Maybe some, like when we're creating a backup out of a snapshot, if the driver supports it, then it's good. Otherwise, we might create volume out of it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it might let you avoid the cloning a temporary volume.
Yeah. So Elon, was your question like where should we put this option in the default section, in the driver specific section for the user, like in
Yeah.
Cinder?
It's clear. It's clear. Yeah, so we put that basically we're in the same place. We're defining it now in this latest version, and in that way, every backend can have its option set or not, right? And from the volume manager, it will be possible to just access this option from the driver, whatever driver is using. It's clear to me now.
Okay.
And thanks for that suggestion. It was actually made much better usability.
All right, I just pinged Cardoe, so he should be jumping on here shortly. Just to circle back, Airline, you've got everything you need. Is there any?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to discuss about this directly with Raja, I can ping him offline if he had some time.
Hello, Doug.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I was been jumping between a number of calls.
No worries. It's a crazy week, man. We got time for you if you want to jump into it.
Yeah, so I'm very new to Cinder. Storage is not my jam. Bare metal servers are my jam. I come from the Ironic group, but we are now using NetApps for right now, and going to use some other devices. So I've been engaging more with Cinder, at least from our org, at least to kind of give you the background there. Some of the funkiness that we have is that NetApp has a concept, they call it SVM. I guess it's probably like storage VM. It's like partitioning. And so there's been a want to do SVMs potentially per tenant. And so I've kind of come up with a wrapper driver around Cinder, NetApp driver that makes it happen. But in kind of going through that, I kind of had thrown at you, John, like some questions around. There were things that were a little hard that I wonder if I don't want to just necessarily throw out a patch because I don't know if it's the right direction or whatnot. So I kind of just had just ambiguous questions around that area, if that makes sense to you guys. Where I struggled a little bit is there's a lot on the volume driver. There's like a lot of just like keyword args that are they're required, right? And so I was like sitting there like, can I just make these params on like actual params rather than, like init, for example, is like a keyword args, but you need to always pass in, and everything always does pass in the like configuration section name, for example. Just as an example to that, right? Like, could that be something to make that a little easier? I don't know. And then the NetApp driver goes around in circles, like loading configs and loading and building connection objects, like reading from the config over and over again. And so my little wrapper is essentially creating when I have to create a SVM, I have a section that is for my default SVM, and I create another section that's a copy with the new SVM name rather than starting a whole new volume driver. But since the NetApp driver kind of loads for like its pool and whatnot, the connection or the section name, it doesn't cascade through nicely. Like it's almost like there should be like some base class or something. Is that more to bring up with the operators or like NetApp themselves around their maintenance of their driver? Is that something like a common pattern? Because I looked at like the Dell driver, and the Dell driver is structured a lot of like class inheritance and stuff like that. And so it's more like, I don't know, just more stumbling blocks around making that driver easier. And then would there be interest in adding some of that multi SVM functionality? Is like the last question of all that. And it kind of lets you dynamically add another driver without a section. So that's my whole long rant. I don't know if I made any sense.
For a little bit. Just a quick question. Your POC wrapper, is that up? Can I
Yeah.
Is that something people can view?
Yeah, it's disgusting, but I will absolutely share.
So
it.
yeah, at least it can give some context.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have shared that.
No worries.
And could you explain what you mean by adds a driver? Do you mean like at runtime, or is
Yes.
this just a Cinder driver?
It does it at runtime.
Typically, well, let me phrase it this way. Will it add an additional Cinder volume service using these new dynamically added drivers?
No. And so
Okay.
that's another way that I could go.
No, don't.
We're running it.
I like that. I like your
Okay.
first answer.
Okay. So we're running this in Kubernetes, and so I mean, I guess that was another option of like spin up another pod that's another Cinder volume. But it's
Yeah, that doesn't scale very well for us. So if you've got a way of basically having one Cinder backend and basically Cinder API calls to, provision volumes and attach volumes and all that, go through some sort of multiplexing to achieve your goal.
That's exactly what I'm doing. So in this
Excellent.
in this example, I'll like to roughly explain what this is doing. Is this is the driver that we load versus the normal NetApp driver. When a project in Keystone is created, we're operating on events, and I can link you to that example. But if there's a tag put on that project that is like NetApp SVM or something like that, that when we see that event in our Keystone project create or Keystone project update, we have a little bit of Python that runs, calls out to that NetApp, creates an SVM on that NetApp, and we use a pattern that we have exposed through the configuration variable right now that is OS dash and then the project UUID without any dashes in it is the SVM that's created on that NetApp. The driver polls periodically. There was already a poll loop in there for the storage and for polling all the SVMs that are on there so that it can calculate how much disk space is available in there. So I kind of hacked onto that, and just when I see another SVM that matches the pattern of OS dash, I create another instance of the driver. I've modified the pool name to have the SVM with the plus symbol, and then the actual NetApp calls it flex volume name. And so in my wrapper, I strip out everything before the plus symbol and pass that on to the actual NetApp driver. So try to be as lazy as possible, basically.
What's the end goal of this? Like I'm sort of a little confused. Like is the idea to have a single backend that you can use any storage with or something? Or any
No, I have the requirement that I have to keep certain projects of their volumes and everything have to live in their own SVM. So that's what this achieves.
so it's basically like partitioning, like almost like as if you had a different backend but for the same storage.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, there's no difference because the backend pools, like if you do the backend pool list, today the NetApp driver only loads the list of. It specifies the backend pools to flex volumes, is what NetApp calls it, that are on the singularly configured SVM. Instead, what I'm doing is your backend pool list includes all of the flex balls from multiple SVMs. The I guess the last part in all of this that I need to then find is we take the project for a scheduler filter. I honestly don't even know where I configured that right now, but for a scheduler filter, we filter the we'll create a private volume type that is allowed to the project that's allowed to use that SVM, and that scheduler filter targets that. I'll find that line of code. It's like one line.
So to see if I understood correctly, this will be like a per tenant backend, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
Tenant, the admin creates a tenant, and then you trigger a series of processes that will create these scheduler filters, and then it will like dynamically, and that's why you call it dynamic. It will dynamically create this new NetApp that will connect to the SVM that was also dynamically created for that tenant.
Yes.
Yeah. So for I think for those that are not so familiar with the concept, the SVM is just like it is as a NetApp backend with like networking pools and everything, like completely isolated one from the other. If that's correct, right? No, something like that.
Yes. And so they have the concept of that complete isolation where you have a user that is only scoped to that SVM and you can only access within that SVM. The docs allude to that working, but that doesn't actually work with the existing Cinder driver. You must use a cluster-wide credential. And I see there's code in there that checks, is my credential cluster-wide? If not, set a Boolean to say that I don't have cluster-wide access. But because when I was saying earlier, because of the way other parts of the NetApp code are not really inheriting classes, they're like instantiating other classes and they load the config all over again. They don't have that knowledge of I don't have cluster-wide access. So like other parts of the whole driver assume that they have cluster-wide access anyway. So I don't really know why it's limited to just one SVM in the existing driver today, right? Like, because they need the whole access to the whole thing.
Is this supposed to be part of like a regular Cinder deployment, or this is just a specific NetApp architecture that is being used?
I don't know. NetApp's doing that SVM thing as their partitioning. I'm learning storage as I go here,
Mhm.
right? Like so I'm a little clueless, but yeah, it's supposed to be their isolation, is what I understand.
So
It sounds similar to me to our concept at Hitachi of a resource group, and we kind of have right now our driver requires basically full access to. I wonder if it's something you could solve with like extra specs or something, like to point out which resource it belongs to, and just the NetApp driver just uses that to determine. But yeah, I'm not like, because I feel like you probably need different sets of credentials and stuff too for each of these SVMs,
Yeah,
right?
you
Yeah.
would, yes.
So, as this is something really dynamic, and I was particularly interested about this discussion because this is something that Manila pretty much offers. That option of creating multiple SVMs on demand based on the tenant, it's called DHSS True mode in Manila, meaning that whenever you have like a neutral network that's from a given tenant, we will end up creating a new SVM for that particular tenant or that particular share network. And then we'll start exporting shares in that. I think from the things that you were mentioning and looking at the implementation that you shared, the only thing that's not particularly clear for me at the moment is how are you handling the networking that when you are configuring the SVMs currently. And what, do you have any other expectations on working with those SVMs? Because it's there's a lot of things that you can do with that, and then that means you would need to add a lot of features for it as well.
That's my next area, and that's why I was meeting with the Neutron people a whole lot. Yeah, so the next area, so my area that I'm in is all bare metal, all driving the data centers, right? And so yeah, my interest is to have this. So I guess more context, we're using Nova right now with Nova flavors, and teams at Rackspace build their products for customer facing stuff on top of us, and they consume Nova flavors, right? Nothing I do and nothing I'm interacting with is actually customer facing. All my customers are all internal orgs here. So, but essentially want to plug all this storage into Ironic and Nova to hook up to the server. And so some of what we've done inside of Nova is some patches to make it possible that you can do volume attach. And we are calling out to the BMC of the server to actually hook up NVMe over TCP or iSCSI to have that storage available to that machine. So it's all out of band outside of the OS. But your question about the networking, absolutely, there is some stuff there that need to figure out, and that's what I was saying. I'm triggering off of events today. So, for example, when somebody goes and creates a volume type that's private, that's targeted to a tenant, we're running Python code to go create those SVMs and go create the subnet and IPs so that those servers can then get attached to that. And I 100% want to figure out some way to kind of store all that inside of Neutron and through OpenStack and have this, like, I want to figure out a way, if it's interesting to the community, to like contribute the whole process, right, upstream. I don't know yet if we're doing it the best way, so don't want to kind of contribute something that's a crappy way. So just stumbling my way through it. I'm essentially, for a little bit more context, I'm essentially taking, in a lot of cases, brownfielding some existing stuff that's being done, and I'm saying, me and my team are basically saying we want to do this with OpenStack exclusively, and OpenStack are the APIs. Like, how can we do this, right? So,
Well, one random thought that occurred to me is we were talking about Manila and allocating tenant networks, and I think that that's primarily because in Manila the clients use the network to access their shares. In the case of Cinder, the instances don't directly interact with the network. They get all of that through libvirt. So I'm not sure I see where the idea of allocating a separate network resource for an SVM comes into play.
so with bare metal machines, for example, our current bread and butter is Dell R7615s. They've got 4 Ethernet connections up to 2 switches in the cabinet, and 2 of those, when we want to use storage on those, 2 of those ports disappear from visibility from the OS because we tell the VMC to disappear those, and then those get assigned an IP and get assigned network data there. They have and then that gives that NVMe over TCP connection out to the NetApp. And in the future, we want to use other storage providers as well. And so that kind of has to get plumbed through networking wise. And that's what I was saying with the Neutron folks, working with them around some changes, because it's actually all VXLAN that is doing this, and VXLAN has to get plumbed to a VLAN, and yeah.
Well, generally, if a client like Nova says, "Hey, I want to attach this volume to this instance,"
Mhm.
then eventually the driver will provide back connection information.
Yep.
It'll create the export on the back end, and then the driver will be responsible for reporting back, and this goes back to Nova. Okay, fine. Here are the credentials you need, and here are the IP addresses, typically, for how you access it. So I suppose it's certainly possible to have that set up so that the network information returned by the driver is unique per tenant if you want to have these bare metal machines network isolated from one another.
And that actually all works today with Cinder and with Ironic and with Nova.
Right.
So Ironic has and this was actually the last question that I had thrown out to John. There's a number of fields today that are, and I can, if you give me a second, I'll go find the code in the Nova driver.
See if I can grab a IRC. I've got all this in logged. I'll see if I can grab that transcript and get that posted too, so that context will be available.
Yeah, and I'll admit I might not be going about it the right way at all. Like, by all means, like, okay, so here's a link to the Nova ironic driver. So when you are using Nova to build, this is what it's going to call when it attempts to connect a volume to that ironic node that is also a Nova node. If you see in there, for example, if you go down to like lines 2058 is actually one that is problematic for us. They are hard coding initiator as the value that is sent along, and so on a volume attach with Cinder, when you're using an iSCSI, all the iSCSI drivers expect you to provide a property that is initiator. But if you're using a NVMe backend, that same value needs to be in the NQN property. And so I don't know of, like, there's not a good list, if you will, of like, for this driver type, these are the expected fields. Because I have actually gone through like some of the other vendors' drivers, and I've seen that they're not necessarily always consistent with the types themselves. So that's kind of what I was wondering, is like, this is kind of for this to be compatible with multiple storage types for a given backend, there almost needs to be a predefined mapping so that Nova sends along the correct data in the same way for Ironic to send that along. And I don't know what the best way to do that is.
So if you see, there is a library called OSBrick. In that,
Yeah.
there is a method called get connector properties. So what that method does is it goes through each of the possible transport types, like the iSCSI, FC, NVMe, and it grabs all the properties specific to that particular area. So there is an NVMe of connector inside OSBrick, where you will find all the relevant properties needed for the NVMe connection.
OSBrick is something that has to run somewhere, though, correct? It's not just a library.
It's a library.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, it is consumed by Nova, Glance, Cinder, different services, but yeah, it's a library that needs to run with some process, some service.
okay, so it sounds like what I should do then is get the Nova Ironic driver to use OSBrick, and that is the common place for it to kind of.
That's OSBrick's job, is to try to abstract all of that stuff.
Okay.
I'm a bit surprised that Ironic isn't using Brick, as we often call it, already, but maybe that's news.
Nope. And so one of the topics that we're having tomorrow in the Ironic group, I think it's at 16:30 maybe, is going to be the concept of, today Ironic can't attach storage out of band after boot. It can only do it at boot time. And so that's another area that I'm looking to work with them to kind of extend Ironic's expectation that it can attach after the fact.
Yeah, so I had a few things to say about the earlier topic when we were discussing the SVMs and this. Yeah, so from a Cinder architecture perspective, we leave it pretty abstract to the backend driver, however they want to configure. So in Cinder terms, we call it a backend. but it is specific to the driver how they want to configure it. So in case of NetApp, we always have vServer, which was so SVM, which was previously called vServer. So that is the equivalent NetApp has provided to us. Inside the SVM, you can find a bunch of flex volumes that act as Cinder pools. That is the terminology, the connection we use from Cinder to the backend in case of NetApp. For the RBD driver, the pool in the RBD driver is equivalent to a backend. So it can vary from like driver to driver. But for the NetApp deployments that I've seen, they always use one SVM per Cinder backend. And if they want to configure multiple SVMs, then they configure multiple Cinder backends. Each Cinder backend can then run into its own service. So that is kind of the architecture we follow on the Cinder side. Related to your approach, I can see your point, like the credentials we provide are cluster-wide, so it can be used to access any SVM, if that's what I understood correctly.
Yes.
But there might be other properties where we want to, I don't know if it supports different transport protocols, like the NetApp driver supports iSCSI, Fiber Channel, and NVMe TCP. So does your driver also support this kind of configurations? And
so my example there was just wrapping the NVMe. That's where I've started. So today we have all the hardware is through Ironic, all the switches and networking is driven through Neutron drivers. It's just been the storage side that's been not OpenStack and its own Snowflake. And so that's where I'm today trying to, like, Cinder's the block storage API, right? Like how do I bring that to this behavior? And I understand some of it is inevitably going to be like we did some dumb downstream things for sure, but like at the same time, I'm just trying to see what are pieces that we could do in a common way that would be beneficial to Cinder as a whole, and we'll work on that, contribute that.
yeah, so the RPC calls we have, like from API or scheduler, that totally depends on the backend driver you have configured. So in your scenario, I can see there is one Cinder volume service which has multiple sections, each per tenant, like multiple SVM sections, multiple backends. I don't know how API or scheduler is going to make a decision based on which SVM we want to pass the request to right now. So that I see as a challenge.
I'll link you. Let me find it.
Well, could this just be like an extra spec, a volume type with an extra spec of, like, NetApp SVM equals.
The extra spec thing was my initial take too. Especially but since the credentials are all different, to me that implies like you should do a back end, like Razat was saying.
Yeah, that's just tricky again from a scalability standpoint. As soon as the tenant numbers start to ratchet up, you're going to be crushing RabbitMQ.
So I'll link that chunk as well. So we enable the driver filter, and then this kind of chunk is what selects the right thing. The NetApp driver is like this proxy driver today, and it has a instance of the actual driver that you want to use inside of the proxy driver. So my little dynamic driver is like a proxy driver in and of itself. And rather than just having today the NetApp drivers have just a one-to-one of when it's loaded, I'm proxying for this thing, and it sets a self._library equals this. I instead did set it to it's self._libraries or something like that. Yeah. Line 357 up there. And I made that a dictionary, and the dictionary the keys are the SVM names. And so that's how I'm proxying out to the correct library. If you let's see.
Would it be naive to imagine somewhere down in the code there's sort of like a SVM equals get SVM for project?
Yes, that's exactly. Yeah, I can find that. But yes, that's exactly what happens.
And that code perhaps could even take care of like ensuring that the SVM exists. So if a new project is added, it'll get created on demand, as it were. You talked about tying into notifications, but I haven't used them enough to know how reliable they are. Like if the service restarts, so you're going to forget about everything, and things like that.
Yeah, so we not all projects get their own kind of SVM. They'll fall into that. So there's a thing on the projects that I ended up doing a tag. But when you create a volume type that is private towards a project, and that project has the tag on it in Keystone that it's allowed to have its own SVM, that event, since there's nowhere that volume type create or volume type delete, since those are not called into the driver at all, they're happening at the API level as far as I'm aware. That's where I hooked into that volume type creation and deletion to create the SVM and to clean up the SVM. So that's why I'm using an event there. I would happily capture that inside of my own driver implementation and do that ensuring there. But I need to do it beforehand because the scheduler will not schedule it unless I have at least done one iteration through the get pools or whatever it is, so that the backend appears in the list. And I just linked that's how NetApp's driver is today. You can see they're all proxies, and where they're calling into the one instance of the library, that function. And so I just made it that it's got a dictionary of those library objects.
Basically, the
looking for that.
SVM information is persistent inside the volume type. I mean, the SVM we were trying to create the volume in.
Yes, because it's based on the it is based on the project ID. So you can see that here's the driver filter implementation down at line 425, and you'll see we are filtering on a capabilities.netapp_project ID matching the project ID that the volume has. And you're absolutely correct. It's an extra spec, and the filter gets that mapped into the capabilities. here.
Okay, so project ID is a capability from the NetApp driver itself. Okay, yeah. So this clarifies how the volume create request go will into the desired SVM. Now, just like highlighting what Alan said regarding scalability. So what happens in the current Cinder model is like we have this RPC queues, RabbitMQ queues, dedicated for each Cinder volume service. And somehow like the logic used for like host at backend, that kind of key you use to redirect it to like the different maybe the driver instances of this dynamically how we are trying to create it. But yeah, scheduler redirects the RPC call based on that. And then there is a fan out queue as well, where the Cinder volume service publishes all the capabilities to the scheduler. So this is like a reverse interaction where Cinder volume talks to Cinder scheduler. How is that part handled in this?
So we're using the normal get volume stats, and then in that last one where I was saying it adds the extra spec. In there, what you'll see is on line 325, I'm modifying the pool name, and I'm taking the existing pool name and prefixing the SVM name, and then using my delimiter, which right now is a plus, and just so that I don't interfere with how you guys currently do the pool name and you have delimiters in there. And so because it's right now the worker at the driver, and then I forget what the next delimiter is. I don't know if it's a colon and then the pool name. So I'm adding the SVM name into the pool name so that the scheduler sees all of the pools. Okay, hash, thank you. Yes. So the scheduler sees all the pools relative to their thing. I can run a backend list over here locally real quick if you against the dev environment here.
My question was more of like how does it get updated? Like, is there a polling interval? Like after how many seconds it gets refreshed, or is it just the first call we do to get pools, and then it gets like scheduler gets all the info, and after that we rely on the same info?
So today, how the existing NetApp driver works is they're implementing the get volume stats, and they have, since it's a proxy driver, they have this library internally, and they're passing that on to whatever implementation it is, whether it's the NVMe or the iSCSI implementation. In mine, I'm just for looping through all of the all the libraries that I have loaded and slapping that all together and returning that all together. Certainly it has a scaling problem, absolutely.
Yeah, so currently Cinder volume, the Cinder volume service calls this get volume stats with a polling interval of 60 seconds by default. So every 60 seconds, we ask the driver to publish these new stats, because if we keep creating volumes, then the allocated capacity that might change, and the scheduler doesn't have this information. So we ask the volume driver to publish those every 60 seconds, so scheduler can take more decisions based on that. Let's say we have capacity filter, so it can select one backend at this time, but after 60 seconds it can select a different. So is that how it behaves right now? That you're implementing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm literally using their exact. I'm actually not just passing through to call get volume stats on every single instance of that backend, because, and goes back to how the NetApp driver is done today. They have there's two classes in there and two things that are getting data for the get volume stats. One of those requires cluster wide permissions because it actually gets data about, they call them flex volumes, are what are the one-to-one mappings to pools. They gather details on every single flex volume for every single SVM for the whole thing, always in that thing. And then they down select to just the ones that they care about in another class. So I'm calling that top level one, and then skipping the down select and just their down select call and just filtering for the SVMs that match my known pattern. And so it's honestly, it's no slower than the existing NetApp driver is today, because it already has that behavior.
Yeah, this is
And
more of a Cinder side implementation detail, but yeah, I get the.
Yeah, and so that's kind of why I was asking. Like, I don't know how to necessarily approach some of that NetApp stuff because there's a little bit of funkiness in that existing behavior, because it does really seem like with the existing implementation, you really just care about the data in the one SVM that the existing driver is connected to, right? You don't want to actually be gathering the stats across the whole cluster, but that is what's being done today.
Yeah, that is certainly strange. I mean, it makes the call much slower than expected, given it's done on a polling time period, like periodic time, sorry. So, sorry, what's the motivation behind, like, so you implemented this custom driver? Is the motivation that some of the parts of it should get integrated into, like, the core Cinder driver, or like?
Yeah, so my goal is kind of two parts. Does it make sense to kind of have, because like I said, we're doing a little bit of dynamic network allocation and things like that on the volume type creation. That is all with the existing model of Cinder. That is, I don't know what the best way to call it, but like static configuration, or same way when you set up a virtual machine, like you have to put down your OS and put down libvirt and all that. But if there is a possibility of doing separate, essentially, networks for more tenant isolation, does it make sense to try to cut, like, if there is an interest in the community from supporting that, does it then, can we somehow contribute some API surfaces or extensions to give the ability to have that more natively, to be able to do those call outs rather than triggering on the event like we're doing? And then the other part is, I'm interested in making Ironic behave better with Cinder. And like, I didn't know about OS Brick, I'll be honest with you. And so today, Ironic is, like I said, very hard coded towards one iSCSI implementation that they test with, and that's it. Like, it doesn't even work out of the box with a NetApp. It doesn't work out of the box with a Dell Power Store. Like, the parameters don't line up. I get key exceptions in those, and so I would like to. I was kind of curious, like, is there a place way? And you pointed me to OS Brick, so I'll go there, because I want to kind of push on Ironic to improve the behavior so that it works with potentially multiple backends. So yeah, so this was kind of a hack to start the conversation. Does it make sense to develop something like that?
The goal sounds like it has merit. The Cinder people get a little, anxiety attacks because depending upon how it got implemented, you may wander off into, oh no, don't do that. But the goal sounds fine. It's just a matter of how to achieve it in a way that doesn't break down.
Yeah. So I'll say on the network side, we do use tenant networks and everything for the storage. Like Neutron is doing all of that for us.
Yeah, certainly improving Ironic's implementation to be more abstract about what type of storage backend you are using and which transfer protocol you're using. That should be abstracted. I have pasted two links. One is to the connectors directory of OSBrick, and another is the NVMe specific information that we gather that you were asking about. So that certainly is should be pursued, in my opinion. That Ironic shouldn't hard code these things and just use the library we have. Regarding the Cinder specific implementation, we surely need to include the NetApp vendor team into the discussion. At the same time, I feel like the approach is very, in concept, it's very good, but in implementation, it's very scary to me. Like this might work like in a test environment, but in production, it might cause like a lot of issues.
So one of the things I see right away in what you linked me on the NVMe side is it's going to run the NVMe binary. Like where am I gonna run the NVMe binary? Just in the, because it's checking to see if it can run it.
It's on the initiator, whatever it is. Like if it's coming from Nova, then it's going to be the compute host.
But I don't have a compute host.
If we are integrating this in with Ironic, so that's the use case we are referring to, right? Like integrating this with Ironic. So where does Ironic run in generally,
So it's that stuff is handled by the BMC, or OBM or iDRAC, ILO. So we are essentially doing in Ironic, we do an API call from our service to the Dell, the HP out of band manager, and we configure that connection there. So there is no kind of compute service. The Nova compute is a fake, if you will, that is just running inside of Nova somewhere.
so when we talk about the Nova Ironic driver,
You typically you run it in the same place that you're running your Nova conductor. You don't actually run it on anywhere, because all it's doing is our API calls to Ironic.
so where is the end goal? Like where do we want to attach the volume?
It attaches on the server.
The bare metal.
Yeah, the bare metal server.
So you're trying to boot from a volume over NVMe.
Correct. Which works. Right. So I guess I would need to then work to get this a little more abstract so that it's not running NVMe commands immediately, right? Like it would need to have some kind of like, I am a virtual thing.
Yeah, normally Nova's attaching volumes to instances, and so the OS brick code that Nova invokes can, execute NVMe CLI commands.
Yeah.
But in this instance, Nova's over here. The ironic node you're trying to boot, the bare metal node's over here. I don't know enough about. I mean, certainly. Bare metal nodes can boot from NVMe. I hope they can boot from NVMe TCP. It's over the network as opposed to a locally attached. But what sort of information you have to feed it to boot? That's probably going to be between Nova's ironic driver and
So
BMC.
I'm able to actually do, and I'll go find those patches, but essentially in that Nova ironic driver, the properties that it's setting and passing, and then the properties that it's, because it calls to ironic to read settings from the BIOS. It's not really the BIOS, but kind of the same kind of settings there. It's saying like, what is your, I guess, the initiator, am I using the right term? Or and the initiator side, what is your NQN? So it's querying the BMC and says, what is your initiator ID? And I know like with Nova's code, you guys are reading something that must be set inside the operating system that the NVMe command is going to use, right? So it's reading whatever's set in that BMC and it gets that. And it wasn't a big flurry of patches. It was literally just changing like a couple of like read this key instead of that key and set instead of that key kind of deal. Those haven't been pushed into that public repo yet, but I can go get those pushed. But that does work to configure Dells at least. HPs is another story of a different pile of things. And so on the ironic side, one of the things we're doing is finishing off the abstraction so that the hardware vendor it's agnostic from our side. And so that's kind of the want as well is to see how can we make sure that we line all that up with what Cinder expects and Cinder provides. But I can boot NVMe over TCP. I can boot iSCSI over TCP against Dells and HPs with 2 different patches.
Well, I'm now wondering if OS Brick is not the answer, because OS Brick seems to operate under the notion that the instance in Nova are like this, but in this bare metal environment, they're not. And so OS Brick's going to make assumptions about, hey, you're running on this node. When in fact, no, you're running on that one over there. But now you'll have the challenge of getting it to work with every vendor.
It's not that. Redfish is the protocol that they're all using. It's not that far off. HP will finally stop using their OEM. There's a section in Redfish that allows for OEM specifics, and so
they put all their stuff there.
Yeah, but their next ILO update, they're gonna move it into there, and so that shouldn't be that big of a problem.
Well, that may be the integration point. I mean, you pointed to some code that's not OS Brick, but it's got some hard-coded fields and all that. That will have to be generalized in a way, and then get the vendors to agree that, hey, via Redfish, you guys need to be able to link it up appropriately.
So for example, in what I'd linked with that initiator, Nova does a call for get or volume attachment create. And so, for example, volume attachment create, if you're doing an NVMe, you must specify an NQN. If you're doing an iSCSI, you must specify that field as initiator for the NetApp. For the Dell Cinder driver, it's always initiator, whether it's NVMe or it's NVMe.
iSCSI.
iSCSI or NVMe,
Yeah.
the Dell driver expects that field in that volume attachment create. And that's what I was asking about the Cinder side. Like those parameters are the ones that are not standard for the backends themselves.
Which Dell driver are we referring to?
Power Store or Power Flex. I don't know which one those people played with.
If it is
Here.
PowerFlex, then it has its own protocol. It's IP based, but it's called Scale.io.
Okay,
They're
then it's-
adding support for TCP. They've got an upstream patch right now for that.
Yeah. So in the OSBrick repo, if you see in the connectors, then there is a specific file called Scale.io, where this PowerFlex type of attachments are handled, which is non-standard to iSCSI, Fiber Channel, or NVMe, which is like the default protocol they had. Now they are starting support NVMe TCP.
So I don't know which hardware it is, but it is the TCP stuff. It's like it's Dell people on site in our offices doing that for TCP. Or I should say it's like some combined office with them in Austin. But what I'm saying is it does work to the ironic side. The ironic fields mostly are the same. It's just we're having to adjust the fields that Nova passes to Cinder calls of the volume attachment create and whatnot based on the back end that Cinder is using, right? And so that's what I don't know how to handle that, right? If I go off and now try to use another vendor's storage thing, does that mean that their parameters are going to be different? How do I query that? How do I have that kind of standardized? Because the Cinder API call is just ** keyword KW args, right? And so each kind of backend vendor has kind of done their own little thing here and there.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that way except a few of them. Otherwise, the iSCSI, FC, and NVMe things are standardized because the compatibility layer they use, OSBrick in between, has the connector standardized for them. So the host information they get, the initiator information they get, like let's talk about Nova and Cinder. So Nova asks OSBrick, like, get me the initiator information, whichever transport we support. If there are HBAs attached, it gets the WWPNS. If it is like a Ethernet, then like iSCSI. So whatever configuration, and then we pass it to the backend driver, like Nova calls Cinder, and then it is passed to the backend driver, which parses that information. So as long as OSBrick standardizes these initiator properties, the backend driver needs to consume this. Now, if we talk about some specific cases like the LightOS and the PowerFlex, these drivers have some custom code in OSBrick to support their particular driver, but otherwise it should be standard in the way.
So is there like a library to import that specifies like what those parameters are? I guess, okay, I see. Maybe. If
you just see the get connector information, get connector property, sorry, this method, I have pasted the link for NVMe.
Yeah.
But if you see the same one in iSCSI or Fiber Channel, you will see the same set of properties are returned for that transport protocol.
So, but okay, it's really audit the function call and see what properties are set. There's not a list of defines, if you will.
Yeah, I don't think so. There are defined somewhere in the documentation. But yeah, if you just check the example I just pasted, it is for this iSCSI, which uses initiator, which we are referring to is for iSCSI. And this gets the IQ and okay, this is not the master code, but you can switch the branch to master and yeah, it's initiator only. And the initiator we get from this get initiator method is like the IQN, which is like a file etc and an initiator name something.
So like, I'll link a neutron thing. It's like they have this neutron lib, which it sounds like it's like OS brick. And so like these are in dictionaries that they work with, anything related to port bindings is defined there, right? And so you kind of don't that's those are strings, but there's also defines kind of, and that's kind of what I was kind of looking for. But in this case, like you just linked, it's really the string there is initiator that I'd need to use in that case.
Yeah, for all iSCSI connections, it will be the initiator field that will be returned. Again, I don't think we have similar code reference or documentation where these bindings are listed. I mean, OSBrick code is certainly a reference. Otherwise, you can go to the existing gate jobs we have. We have ones for iSCSI, we have one for NVMe. There you can get these properties if you want to see a real world thing like how OSBrick fetches which are properties. So that's another place. But yeah, maybe not very trivial to see all this.
Okay, so if I sent you a patch against OSBrick in the connectors directory, and I created like a constants folder, let's say, and using your line 71, if I made in that constants, if I made like iSCSI underscore initiator equals initiator as the string, and then changed that line 71 to use that constants dot iSCSI underscore initiator or something like that. Would that work? Because then I could go into the ironic side and we could import OSBrick and just, if the property isn't there, then it's not, if it doesn't have a define, it's not the right definition. Does that make sense? And that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any concerns. I mean, again,
I mean, basically, try to get rid of as many hard-coded strings.
Yeah, that's all.
I'm always in favor of that.
Okay, because I feel like that would then ensure like I could go to the Dell guys and be like, hey, you're using, in the NVMe case, you're using initiator somewhere, like you're expecting initiator, not the NQN field. You must have hard coded that somewhere, not done the right thing, right? Like at least I'd have a way to push on them.
Yeah.
Right. Because
stick to whack them with.
Yeah. Because today they're just like, we'll use our back end, right? And we're wanting to potentially have multiple backends and not be tied to one. So, okay.
Interesting stuff.
I thank you guys for all humoring me. I'm sure I went longer than you expected. Like I said, the goal is to make Cinder work well with bare metal boxes from our side, right? And but how can I do that in a way that contributes upstream and not just we're going to go off in our own little downstream pile and do our own thing.
Yeah, looks like Cinder was designed in a way to expect, like always, the attachments will always go to a host. I mean, there should be a system running the host operating system, and always there will be VM workloads. So making it more compatible with bare metal or ionic would be a good case to look forward to.
Yeah. So I'll say the next Dell, or not Dell, the next Intel chipset, whatever, right? They always love to do hardware acceleration for things, and at least the rumor mill that I'm hearing is that NVMe 2.0 is done as a spec, or is it close or something like that? Some revision on some TCP, but Intel will do the hardware offloading natively through there so that we can have block storage like good all the way through.
Yeah.
I don't know what the word is there. I've spent the year learning about networking. Now I'm spending some time learning about block storage and Cinder. So apologize for vocabulary.
Thanks, Doug. So just to circle back, are there any blockers or unanswered questions that would require further discussion this week? Do we need to schedule any more time, or do you have what you need to move forward?
No, I think what I'll do is do that patch on OS Brick to make some of those constants there and send that to you guys, and then take that to tomorrow's ironic conversation around making the Nova ironic, because it's a cross session between Nova and ironic around better storage conversation. And so saying to Nova that we're going to have the constants there so that it's not just this hard coded strings somewhere randomly in the driver, and that way it stays consistent throughout. And that's what we'll do for that aspect. For my side with the NetApp, I'm gonna probably iterate some more and maybe send you guys some patches at least. I don't know who controls. That's what I've not known. I guess that's my only last question. Who kind of controls or drives the NetApp driver? Is it the Cinder community, or am I really needing to engage NetApp people as well?
The right thing to do would be to try to engage the NetApp
Okay.
folks that are participatory within Cinder. That would be your first. I would
Okay.
think that would be the first place to look.
Okay. Because want to engage on some of those volume pools, like I said, right now, on a box that has a lot of SVMs on it, and it's only got one little Cinder connection, I actually get warnings out of Cinder saying that it took too long because it's calculating up all the other things on there and not just staying focused to its slice of the world, and like stuff like that has been funky. So but I'll engage them, and like I said, I can put bug reports into your bug tracker or kind of whatever the right way to go. I haven't known, because your project is a lot more vendor connected than Nova, let's say.
Yeah, but Launchpad would be good. Our weekly meetings would be a good place. And if those things don't seem to be working, just ping me directly and I'll try to put you in direct contact with
Okay.
some NetApp folks. NetApp in general is pretty active, so this shouldn't be too hard.
All right, cool.
We might also have NetApp sessions later during PTG, right?
Yes.
We can conduct, because this is a problem that Doug clearly mentioned about, like slowness while calculating this backend stats. So that is certainly something NetApp team was already looking into. So they would benefit from this information, like it's going through all the SVMs, which makes it kind of slow. So
Yeah, Thursday at the top of our session, which is at 1400 UTC. We've got some NetApp sessions led by Jay Anand. So he should be there, and there might be some overlap, or at the very least, we can connect. And
Yeah,
hopefully
I'll be on then.
Cool.
All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Dave.
thanks, Doug.
All right, that is the end of the block today. Do we have anything pressing or anything that needs to be discussed now, or do we break till tomorrow?
I just wanted to ask, like, we have a cross project with Ironic. I think this was, I mean, Doug highlighted one of the points there, like Cinder and Raspberry's compatibility, like this compatibility with Ironic.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the topics there, right?
Yeah, it is. It sounds like there's quite a bit of overlap there, because they're wanting to know, there's some property fields with regard to NVMe connections for VMCs booting bare metal servers from volumes. It sounds like some of the answers today for Doug will be similar to what we offer tomorrow. Those sessions should be in the agenda. I think, to the best of my knowledge, those times are accurate. There was some moving around on the mailing list, but I think I captured the latest accurate state of those. But just to clarify, we've got 30 minutes at the top of the session tomorrow, and then Cinder Nova team session, and then after that, the Cinder Nova Ironic team session, which will be likely the booting from volume stuff. The Cinder Nova stuff, I can't. I need to look at the Etherpads. I feel like that might be the encryption API stuff, but I need to double check.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
All right, then we'll call it for today, and I'll see you back tomorrow, round 2.
You guys.
Yep.
Excellent.
You
Yeah.
should stop the recording. Otherwise it will.
On it, yeah.